We turn now to Lesson 25, the last one in Discipleship Essentials on the topic of money. As I indicated in my last video, this topic seems a bit out of sorts and is clearly labeled a bonus section. It was added later when the publisher came to me and asked if there was an additional chapter I would like to put in. And immediately my mind went to money because it's the direct connection of our heart before God. Where your treasure is, there is your heart also, says Jesus. Where we spend our money is an indication of what is important to us, our values. Right in the midst of 2 Corinthians, Paul gives us two chapters, in chapters 8 and 9, on the whole subject of giving. Paul is in the midst of taking up an offering among the churches in Macedonia and Achaia, or modern-day Greece. He's concerned about the impoverished state of the church in Jerusalem. The church in Jerusalem has suffered from poverty because there was a great famine that took place in the mid-40s. The church there was sort of isolated because it was considered a cult, a break off from Judaism. They were isolated, they were exploited in terms of the business world. And Paul sees an opportunity here in the poverty and the state of the church in Jerusalem. He's deeply concerned about the division between the Jewish church and the Gentile church. And he sees an opportunity for the Gentile church to sense its indebtedness to the church in Jerusalem. The gospel started from that as the home church, the mother church. And the Gentiles know the grace of God because of the faithfulness of that church. So they can reach out and show their sense of indebtedness by giving graciously to the church in Jerusalem and bringing the two together as one. So let's turn our attention to the very first part of 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 5, which I want to be the subject of our time together in this video. We read, "We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in the wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. And this not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us." These chapters 8 and 9 are fascinating simply from the standpoint of the way Paul motivates the Corinthians to give in so many different ways. And I would just encourage you to read that and ask that one question. What is Paul doing here in terms of how he is motivating the Corinthians? But with this very first one is actually the most fascinating one because he holds up the impoverished church of Macedonia in a way to shame the church in Corinth, which were much wealthier, to get them to give a little bit more than they were personally giving. The Macedonians were so poor that Paul originally thought not to even include him in asking for them to participate in this offering. Why add further burden to them? They could easily have been added to the recipient list, not the donor list. And Paul dramatizes their poverty with this phrase, extreme poverty. In fact, this word for poverty is the same word used in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the destitute in spirit. Blessed are the who down and dirty poverty in spirit. So this is the state that they find themselves. And when the Macedonians got word about Paul's offering, they might have come to him and said something like this. "Listen, Paul, we'd like to help, but we believe charity begins at home. Why should we be helping those we don't even know when we have so much need right here at home? Why let the little that we have be sent to people we don't even know across the world?" But instead, that was not their reaction at all, was it? Paul writes, "For in the severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part." You might say that the wealth of generosity was that spirit that captured them, because they didn't have a whole lot to give. My guess is if you had added up the amount that the Corinthian church was able to give out of their wealth and the amount that the Macedonians were able to give out of their poverty, that would have paled in comparison to the Corinthian church. But that's not the point, is it? The amount is never the point. It is the heart of the giver. And this is what Jesus alluded to when he pointed to the widow's mite, the widow who gave her last 2 coins over against those who gave out of abundance. Generosity is not about the amount that you have to give. In fact, it has been generally shown that those with the least give a greater percentage of what they have over those who have much more than they have. Studies have made this clear. One particular study where this was evident, the researcher concluded, the study reveals heart-warming generosity and bone-chilling selfishness. It's the poor and the struggling who generally lead the way. And this is certainly true of the Macedonian church. But verse 3 and 4 contain my favorite lines. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. Begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. No way you're going to leave us out, they say to Paul. You have to take our money. Macedonians reminded me of an incident that took place in my very first ministry position right out of seminary. I was doing college ministry in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We held a fast for 36 hours, and some 300 plus college students participated in this fast. They got pledges per hour of the fast. We raised about $8,000, which was quite a bit, some 50 years ago. And then I have this vivid image. There was a young woman who was a nurse who was not able to participate in this fast because she was on duty during that time. At the end of worship that particular Sunday, she came up to me with 3 crumpled $1 bills laced through her fingers. And she pleaded with me with her eyes and said, please take my money. I want to be a part of this. Don't leave me out. Well, that was the spirit of the Macedonians. But the big question is, what was it that produced this spirit of generosity? I think 2 words sum it up: gratitude and grace. They experienced a sense of gratitude for their connection with the relief of the saints. Paul says, begging for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. That word taking part translates the word koinonia. I guess that's one of the Greek words you might know. And this word koinonia means fellowship, or what we share in common. Macedonians had a sense of indebtedness and gratitude towards the church in Jerusalem because of the grace that was given to them that came from that church. Paul writes about this in Romans chapter 15, verses 26 and 27. For Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make some contribution for the poor among the saints at Jerusalem. For they were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have come to share in their spiritual blessings, they also ought to be able to share in their material blessings as well. They got out of themselves. They became a part of something bigger than themselves, became part of a worldwide mission. They moved from their provincial, parochial look of turning inside themselves to be a part of something that they wanted to be part of. And when that happens, then your money automatically follows. As I was preparing actually for this video, I got a phone call. And this person wanted to contribute to a particular need through our ministry. Our GDI director in the Ukraine wanted to relocate his family because of the impending invasion of the Ukraine. And she was wondering how she could participate in that. She wanted to help relieve the burden of this particular family. And I think that just happens naturally when you have a sense of gratitude and indebtedness and a part of a worldwide mission that's bigger than yourselves. Gratitude is rooted in the awareness of grace. Gratitude is derived from grace. Paul begins this section in chapter 8 with these words: we want you to know, brethren, about the grace of God shown in the churches of Macedonia. Giving at its best is not a financial transaction, but a spiritual experience. Why do we need grace? Because left to ourselves, we are self-focused and possessive. As our lesson will indicate, money is not simply a neutral means of exchange. It has the power to become a money god, to create its own sense of devotion. And if we allow that money god to take over, then we can see attitudes like, I'm a self-made person. I've worked hard for what I have. We pulled ourselves by our own bootstraps, so why can't they as well? We get very possessive about what we have. Only by the grace of God will we be released to share in gratitude with those around us. The vice grip of possession can only be liberated by the awareness of grace. The Macedonians knew not only their indebtedness and connectedness to the church of Jerusalem, but first and foremost their indebtedness and connectedness to the grace of God. Paul pulls out the trump card here in verse 9 of 2 Corinthians 8. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. Paul observed in the Macedonian story his own story. In 1 Corinthians 15, he lists the resurrection appearances of Jesus, and then he says, comes to himself, the last on the list, as one untimely born, as one abnormally born, as one who was born out of sequence. He did not even have the right to be a follower of Christ. He persecuted the church. And then he writes this, for I am the least of the apostles, did not even deserve to be an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God within me. In other words, the more I am fully aware of God's grace, the more generous I will be. I will be released to be able to be given all that God has given to me. The grace of God is what does that. Our awareness of our undeserved favor before God sets us free to say, how can I contribute? How can I be a part of the work that you are doing? This was true of the Macedonians. Down in the depth poverty, subsistence livers, hand-to-mouth existence. And yet they want to be a part of what God was doing. May that be our mantra as well. Lord, let me take part in your worldwide mission. Please, please, don't leave me out.